been a busy season for me. I feel like I can share this with you, somebody who writes quite a bit. I feel like I have the most insane writer's block I've ever had in my life. Like, this is what it looks like for me, and then I'm curious how you would respond. I set times to write. I've done all the research. Research isn't hard for me. Like, I enjoy the research part, the reading part, but it's like the writing part. So I sit down to write, and I will find every excuse to not write. In fact, I will create excuses to not write. It's rough right now.
Well, that's got to be. I mean, I think we'd be hard pressed to find a writer who doesn't have that. For me, so like I got the whole brick thing, the thing, you scan your phone. I have, blocking software on my computer. If I'm, I use research as an excuse sometimes, like, oh crap, I need to go get a footnote for this, and then before I know it, but, I think I've heard a bunch of writers say it, but I think Jerry Seinfeld gets credited with it a lot of like, hey, you can either write or you can do nothing for, whatever the time is, an hour, 2 hours, but you can't do anything else, which is easier said than done. But no, I mean, dude, I think that's complete. Is this the, now, are you done with the manuscript for Unseen Battle, or is this?
Yeah. So I'm done. I'm done with the manuscript for Unseen Battle. This is for the next trade book that will be the follow up to the Hidden Piece, which, I can tell you offline about it.
Yeah, sure.
A little bit more. I don't think I'm allowed to share it publicly yet, but I'm excited. I'm excited for everybody to hear about it. Okay, so I kind of had this idea that I wanted to just do like some conversations with some friends.
Yeah.
You and I travel quite a bit. You do the more fun travel, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like I go to places like Atlanta,
right?
Dallas. You go to places like India.
Mm-hmm.
You're going
to. Well, you go to India too.
Well, I'm going to India in a couple of days, but like,
you
go
real?
there for. Yeah. We're going to. I didn't tell you this. We're going to Hyderabad, like literally on Monday. Or
That's
the
awesome.
First time my entire family of 6. The kids have never been. So I'm gonna
awesome.
I'm gonna eat Hyderabadi biryani, and I'm gonna send you a picture.
Oh, please, dude.
And
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll do that as like a family thing. But like, and I've told you this before. You haven't taken me up on it yet. But like, I want to be your research assistant for the next trip you go on, because like you do it the fun, like the way that I'd want to do it. Like you're going to research, you're going to learn and study. Like my family would not.
No.
Like indulge me
in
the way that I would want to do it.
No, I don't. And I mean, I've slowed down a little bit. So I'm 37. I think we're like the same age, right?
Bro, I turned 40 this year.
Okay, wow. So yeah, I mean, I'll round up. We're the same age.
The okay wow is crazy.
But like,
okay wow is crazy.
So as I've gotten older, I'm like, my kids are 12 and 7. I've been married 14 years. My wife has been very gracious to me to let me go off on all these adventures with my friends and call it research and turn it into books and content. But I've slowed down a little bit. So I'm picking and choosing more. I was just in Japan a few months ago. And then I don't have any India trips on the docket. But I've been itching. I was in Varanasi a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And that was like, that kind of India'd me out a little bit, if I'm being honest, because Varanasi is, it's almost, I don't know. It's like the darkest place I've ever been.
I was going to say, I mean, you were starting the death cult, right? Like it was basically.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's so like, so in Hinduism, as you know, like everybody's cremated in the height of success in Hinduism is to be released from the cycle of samsara. And the quickest way to do that is to be cremated in Varanasi. And so floating up and down the Ganges, you're just surrounded by death. Dead bodies, burning bodies. And then there's some people, who, I mean, we'll spare the details now, but like there's some folks that have some even more serious beliefs about like, I'd say I'd stop short of saying worshiping those dead bodies, but like, covering themselves in the ash. And it's just wild. And I mean, I had a great group of guys with me for that trip. Some really dear brothers who kept me from going too deep into, some places where, it would have been irresponsible spiritually. But we all walked away from that one. I mean, not really shaken. I have a pastor I work with at Element who, he said one time, he was like, I know too much about Jesus to be afraid of any of this.
That's so good.
But at the same time, it was like, man, let's not grow in despair here. But it was wild. So yeah, but no, I would love to go to India with you. I would love to go to Hyderabad. Hyderabad's one of my favorite places.
Yeah.
Because as you know better than I, is it's one of the few places outside of like Northwest India, Punjab, where there's like, I don't know the percentages, but maybe 30 and 50% Hindu and Muslim.
Yeah.
And it's a wild place to study religion.
Yep.
And they live really peacefully in Hyderabad, which is admirable. We need to go during Ramadan. Because what's that dish? You know it. The Ramadan dish.
I'm blanking.
It starts with an M. Halim.
Halim. Is it Halim? Yeah.
Yeah, dude, that stuff is so freaking good.
Yeah, my mom actually makes some phenomenal Halim. She learned from some of her friends. So the reason this is really good. I was listening to a podcast actually, and there was this question that kind of came up. And as soon as I heard the question, I don't know about you, but I do like my deep thinking in the sauna. That's where.
Dude, my friends are going to lose that because I'm a big sauna guy. I've been hanging out with Russians lately. And they've gotten me hooked on sauna, and I can't force my friends to go in the sauna with me. But yeah, I'm for sure. Come to Charlotte,
and we'll do like some sauna, like research theology, like convos. But I love it. I sit in there, I listen to my favorite podcast. I take a break, I sit out, and then I'll like think. Like I think it's just big with my ADD brain. It's like the perfect place where I'm like there's a goal, there's an objective, but then I'm forced into my own mind. Like I can't take books in there. I just kind of have to just deal with whatever I'm thinking about at the time. And there's this question that kind of came up and the question was like, what does it mean to be human? And I was like, that's such a simple question and yet far from simplistic because then I heard the conversation kind of take all kinds of different spins. And it's like, well, who determines what the definition for humanity is?
Yeah.
What's the goal of humanity? The Greek word telos, like what is the aim or the objective of humanity? And if we don't have somewhat of a like working definition for what it means to be human, then I think the implications theologically, ethically, philosophically, like all of it seems to me the place where we're having so much conflict, you know? And like we could list out politics, we could list off issues of ethics, issues of creation, like just how we handle like the world, you know, and it's like degradation. But I wanted to just kind of have some conversations with some of my kind of more nerdy friends. Hopefully you're okay with that term.
Wear it proudly.
Right, exactly. And I wanted to just like no real prep, just like how we would sit at an event together or at an airport together and just start kind of talking. That's the goal. Yeah. And so like as a preface, you might say some stuff and you're like in real time thinking, you're like, I'm not quite sure. It's not fully, you know, like I would have that in like that reservation that like I'm speculating here. I'm just, you know, so I want to set this up for everybody because I know, Jeremy, you're like a very thoughtful person that probably stresses you out just a little bit. At the same time, I think it's probably good for people to just get a little bit of insight into like how our brains work, how we're thinking about these things. And so like, what does it mean to be human? Yeah. Like what is humanity for you?
Yeah. Well, you know, you said that the question is simple. And sometimes I think in those sauna type moments that most people have, hopefully, is that we find ourselves asking that question. And in my experience, you know, we talk about traveling and then, you know, my background academically is studying other religions comparatively. And what I have found is that more often than not, it's the simplest questions that formulate what we would call our worldview. Some people don't like that term in the missiological community, but that's really the simplest way to explain it. It's like, you know, we're both wearing prescriptive lenses. Like our worldview is the lenses through which we see and experience and interpret the world and reality and questions like this. And so I think sometimes Christians often, they go, well, of course we all agree on what it means to be human. And it's like, no, we do not. No. And so for me, I think it's a simple, not easy question. And, you know, my experience in addressing questions like that has really been shaped by seeing what other people, you know, how other people throughout the world, and even here in the States, more so every single day, it changes in the States, like that. You know, what I mean, simply put, and this is where you as a New Testament theologian could probably give it a more informed answer than me. But, you know, pastorally, I find myself answering this question with people in my church, whether they realize it or not. Like, it's like, why do I have the problems that I have? Why can't I overcome this sin issue? Why can't I control my thoughts? Why is it that, you know, man, like, you know, like Paul said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That comes down to human constitution at its base level. And so, you know, I'm sure we'll dig into, you know, like what other people think, but at a basic level, like humans are made in the image of God, and we are made in spirit and body. You know, some people would say like soul, spirit, mind, flesh. But I think a huge part of this that oftentimes Western Christians eschew is that we fall into the trap that most humans throughout history have, which is they pick or choose. I'm either mostly spirit and I have to rid myself of this body, or I have to eschew the physical part of me. And they misinterpret potentially Paul's teachings and Christ's teachings on controlling the flesh, you know, or we fall into like a hedonism, which is, you know, I just do whatever I want because I want to satisfy the flesh. And so I think the Christian answer to what it makes a human is the Imago Dei. We're made in the image of God. There's sanctity to human life, and that the constitution of humanity is in some combination, physical and spiritual, and both are important. And I think that that's something that unfortunately is missing. That kind of teaching is missing from a lot of our pulpits, probably a lot of our seminaries and schools, is that God made us whole, but he made us physical and spiritual. And in my studies of other faiths and things like that, I find that usually one or the other is usually emphasized in other faiths. And I think one of the most unique things about the Christian answer to human constitution is it doesn't overemphasize one or the other. And I think people sometimes kind of mess that up at a simple level. And then they come to their pastor and they say, you know, I just can't get over this issue that I have, or I just can't control my thought life, or, you know, whatever it might be. And it's like, at its base level, this is why this question is so important. It's like, oh, your understanding of who and what you are is not shaped by biblical framework. And that's why I think it's a simple but not easy question. And it's also a super important question. And one that I'm, you know, obviously I'm stoked to hear the other conversations you're going to have alongside this one as well, because it's one that I don't think anybody can ever really dial in perfectly.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it. Like, so like, obviously we're going to get into a little bit of world religions,
Sure.
but I want to touch on what you're talking about. I've got some conversations lined up with some like Old Testament scholars, a couple New Testament folks, a couple pastors, and then just some friends that are just, you know, nobody like is going to probably know them,
Sure.
but I know them and I love them. Yeah. And they're just, I'm excited about those. But you said something that is so fascinating. It's the separation between the physical and the spiritual. And it's almost like, to me, it feels like whenever a person or a group of people, or within a time frame, a historical time frame, when that civilization grasps something, it's at the cost of the other thing, and there's something that has motivated it. So for instance, the focus on the spiritual, it might be an escapist mentality. You know, it's escapism. Like, the physical is wrong, the physical is evil, the physical, and part of that is like, honestly, like, I had to go to the physical therapist this morning. My back is on fire. And you might be asking, well, Joel, what happened to your back? And I'm going to be 40 this year. That's what happened to my back. Like, I woke up. I woke up this morning and that's what's wrong with my back. And it's like, there's a part of me today that's like, yeah, forget the physical.
Mhm.
Like I want just a spiritual embodied, right? And then it's like asking the question, is that what it means to be human? And I was teaching a course the other day, and I was teaching about Eden, and I think fundamentally we get our anthropology today functionally wrong,
Mhm.
because the vast majority of our anthropology, our study of humanity, seems to start with Genesis 3 and the
Mhm.
fall.
Mhm.
Which is understandable, of course. Like this is like this climactic event, but I don't think this is where our anthropology should start. Our anthropology should start in Genesis 1 and 2.
Right.
We ought to start with the ideal of humanity.
Mhm.
Because if we can understand the ideal of humanity, then we can make sense of the tragedy of the fall. And if we know the tragedy of the fall, now we have a little bit better of a clear picture of the work of sanctification that the Lord is trying to do from Genesis 3 until Christ comes in the incarnation, and then from the incarnation until we wait until his final return. And so it's like, okay, what is the Edenic kind of view of humanity is one of the things I'm hoping to retrieve. And so it's like, one is the physical is bad. Let me go for the spiritual. But then the other one would be almost a neglect of the spiritual with a hyper focus on the physical. And I almost wonder if this one is that hedonism thing. Like, I'm gonna just do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy the physical to the fullest, because there is nothing after this. And if there is nothing after this, it's like that Dave Matthews song, it's like eat, love, be merry, like whatever, like that like philosophy of life. And both of those things, I think, end up becoming a worldview, to use your, I think, appropriate language of how we view humanity. And if we just follow that trajectory, it falls short.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not helpful.
Yeah. 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 I think, like you referenced, that concept of eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die. And
Right.
I think 21st century Western thinking has been shaped primarily by a post-Enlightenment mindset that, for better and for worse, has made us more scientific, has made us more, I think in its healthiest standpoint, really helps us understand that science and the things that science teaches us can reveal more to us about God. But what it's done is it's made our churches made up of people who oscillate back and forth between attempting to be spiritual but living as materialists, and materialism being, that pure kind of like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens type, what they were really professing in the late 90s, which is that the idea, and they were not the first ones, but the idea that there's nothing to the world nor human constitution other than the material. And when people buy into that, then, really, and I don't find that enough people are willing to admit this, that the logical conclusion of that worldview is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And so, I think that right now we have a huge crisis in Western Christianity, Western thinking, which is the Christian worldview is professing a healthy balance between understanding that God's design. I think to NT, right? My administrative assistant, she looked at my calendar, saw that we were having this conversation, asked what it was about, and then she actually shared a Tom Wright quote with an NT Wright quote with me, where it said, to be authentically human is to live in God's design.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what does that mean? Right. But it's like, but it goes back to that Edenic understanding. And I think you're spot on. The idea that too often our churches are filled with people who begin their anthropology or their understanding of what is humanity and what does God think of humanity. We start it with, we are inherently bad. We are inherently sinful, and we have to purge something out of our life. And that is true. But when you go back to Genesis 1 and 2 and you begin to understand, God intended for things to be different than they are. And the salvific narrative of Scripture is pointing towards a reality where he is going to restore the spiritual and the physical. Christ was resurrected and then ate meals with his disciples.
Yeah.
And he is interceding on our behalf in the flesh. And so the flesh will too be restored at the end of days, and it will be perfected. And so when we live that way and we answer this question that way, then we really begin to understand, like, okay, that's why Paul said, to conquer the flesh, not because it needed to be purged, but because it needed to be perfected.
Yes.
And it will never be perfected in this life, nor will the spiritual either. We are new creations, and there's that palingenesia, the recreation of all things. But the true recreation of all things is going to happen at the end of days. And so I think that question of like, for a listener who's listening to this conversation, they've never asked this question, and this is the beginning of that thought experiment for them. I would echo what you said, is like, don't start at the fall. Don't forget the fall. Don't forsake the fall.
Exactly.
But start with the idea that God designed things to be a certain way, and the fall broke his design.
Yeah.
And we are on a path following Christ towards the recreation of all things. And he is not going to show preference to the spiritual or the physical. He has in mind that he is going to perfect both, in the same way that Christ took on flesh, dwelt among us, and his body was resurrected too. And that is missing from the rest of the world. I think that's one of the most unique things about Christianity that we don't emphasize very much.
Hey, Humble Theology fam. It's kind of wild, but I wrote my very first book and it released earlier this year. It's called The Hidden Peace. Here it is right here. Finding true security, strength, and confidence through humility. Really what I wanted to do was write a book that was accessible for the everyday average Bible reader, but gave you some sound biblical theology on the ancient virtue of humility, which was in fact the very virtue that sustained and helped the first century church to thrive and flourish. And this was all based around Philippians 2, 8, and 9, the idea that Jesus himself really exampled for us and modeled for us divine humility. And so the book is available right now. If you've ever felt anxious, if you are worried about what other people feel or look about you, I mean, if you've had any type of insecurities really at all in your life and it has robbed you of peace, the secret to the peace that you've been longing for is this ancient virtue that has for far too long been neglected, the virtue of humility. The Hidden Peace is available on Amazon and all the major book retailers where you would normally get it. You can also get a copy from Proverbs 31 Ministries, the P31 bookstore, which is where I serve as director of theology. And I'll have a link in the show notes for you as well. I pray that this book would be an encouragement for you as you grow and you learn how to cultivate the soil of humility, which is in fact the soil in which all the fruit of the Spirit of Galatians 5 flow from. Blessings to you, friends. I posted a reel this morning. There's this famous, there are quotes that take on a life of their own to the point where who knows who actually originally said it. And so this is one of those quotes I feel like where it's like, you could get the people of Israel out of Egypt, but you couldn't get Egypt out of the people of Israel.
Yeah.
And, and I'm like, man, that'll preach, right? That'll preach for days. And then I was thinking about this at the airport while I'm flying with my son.
Yeah.
And I looked at my son, Levi. I was like, Levi, you can get the people out of Egypt, but you can't get Egypt out of their hearts. But before there was ever Egypt, there was Eden. And Levi looks at me, he's like, hey Dad, can I get some lunch? Like, I want to, I'm like, no, I think this is important, but I think this is important. And I'm like, and to this point, it's like, well, actually echoes of Eden have been embedded in the hearts of humanity from the very beginning. And so it's like long before we had Egypt, we had Eden. And yes, Adam and Eve were sent out of Eden. And yet that echo of Eden, the roots of Eden, the ideal of Eden has been embedded in the hearts of humanity ever since, which is part of, in my opinion, why we are a people. It's like that famous U2 song, right? Like, what is that one? That line, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, right? I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Well, we're looking for Eden. We're looking for Jesus, And so it's like, well, what does it mean to be human? I think I'm a story guy. You reference like my New Testament scholarship. I really love biblical theology. And so like, I view the New Testament in the light of a biblical theology of the Old Testament. And there's the sense that like to be human is to return to like walking in the presence of God. To be human is to flourish. To be human is to be submitted to Jesus. To like, there's the beauty of humanity is in the presence of Eden, and yet there are so many competing narratives
Yeah.
to what humanity is and what humanity should be and where humanity should go.
Mm-hmm.
The whole other conversation I want to have with you for a different day and time about AI, because I think this actually, I know, right? This like actually steps into that.
Yeah.
We're going to put that to the side.
Sure, yeah.
In the comments, if you are angry with me, you can say, you can be angry.
Yeah.
We'll get to it. As you study world religions, it's like, what, and you kind of already referenced it, like, what does it mean to be human for these other world religions? And how does that contrast with the Christian view?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that for the listener, whether they're versed in what other faiths say or not, I'll start with sort of like, with my conclusion, which is I've never, studying other religions, I have seen teachings and stories that at its surface, I go, man, I can understand why that would be appealing. But people ask me all the time, like, have you ever seen anything in another faith that's really made you question? And I'm not lying. I'm not putting on, when I say no, I've only seen things that make me more convinced and more thankful to understand the world the way that Yahweh has told me. And I don't have a perfect understanding. I don't believe I ever will. But the breadcrumbs that I've been following, I think, have led me to the truest conclusion available to us. I started studying religions, funny enough, actually, after I got my undergraduate religion degree, because I didn't really study world religions in my religion degree, which is another crime. But I started studying Eastern religions, what we typically call Eastern religions, which is a misnomer because Christianity is an Eastern religion as well. But you know what I mean when I say Eastern. So like Hinduism, Buddhism, you would throw Jainism in there as well. Yep. And then you go to East Asia, Taoism, and then different types of Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism. So when we look at Hinduism and Buddhism, what's interesting is that we see a view of the self, which is in some form or fashion is built upon the idea that the physical world is not just something to be purged, but it's actually illusory. It's illusion. And so you live in this cycle of what we typically call reincarnation. A Hindu or a Buddhist would call it samsara, and you're trapped in this cycle of life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, and there's a moral system called karma which dictates your standing. But at the basic level is the idea that the self, or the Atman, or in Buddhism, the Anatman, and I'll explain why that distinction is important in a moment. In Hinduism, you have the belief in the self, or the Atman, which is what goes from life to life. And the physical is left behind. At your truest self, like the truest version of you is a non-physical self that goes from life to life to life. And now Hinduism, there's a billion something Hindus in the world. I often kind of make the joke that there's a billion different Hinduisms. It's not a monolithic faith at all. So I apologize for any listener who maybe comes from that background or is well versed in that. We'll have to speak somewhat reductionistically here, but at its base level, the idea is that at the end of that cycle, when you are finally released from the cycle of samsara, usually what a Hindu would say is that you essentially rejoin, most Hindu groups would call it Brahman, which is the unknowable, transcendent, non-personal deity. And that really you become your truest self when you rid yourself of this illusory world, this illusory existence, by living life after life after life of establishing good karma. And so what we see just from a quick flyover of that is that a Hindu, or somebody who comes from a Hindu background, would answer the question inherently different than us, is they would say, no, your truest self is not physical. And that ultimately there is a sense of, to truly become you is to rid yourself of this physical existence and rejoin who you were all along, through the cessation of ignorance, or avidya, by rejoining Brahman. And it's what we would call a monistic system. It's the idea that all things are really one, and that the greatest problem humans have is that we are trapped in this ignorance, which rids us of the true understanding of what humans are and what existence is. And so, if we follow that to its logical conclusion, then to compare it to Christianity, we would see automatically that at its base level, Hindus don't place as much value on, it would be wrong to say self-care or something like that, but like they don't place as much value on this physical world or this physical body, because it's going to be gone, right? The true version of them. Now, when we switch to Buddhism, which came out of Hinduism, and Siddhartha Gautama, kind of went off on his own and established this new system of belief. He actually changed the idea of Atman to what we would call An-Atman, which is that there actually is no self. There is no, like the question of what is a human is that you are purely trapped in a system of avidya or ignorance to the true reality of all things. And that all you really are is your karma. And that through life after life after life, of establishing good karma, your karma is diminished, in that nirvana, which most listeners would be familiar with the term at the very least, is essentially the extinguishing of self. And so a Theravada Buddhist, somebody who follows Gautama's teachings a little bit more strictly than like a Mahayana Buddhist, would say that at the end of the cycle of samsara is the extinguish of the self, and the actually just the cessation of existence. And so once again, right, so let's say you're in the sauna in Charlotte or whatever, and you're talking to a Buddhist. This is why this question is so important, because we all walk around, especially in the West, where we kind of assume everybody is Christian or has a Christian worldview, and we begin to see, oh man, if that person believes that and I believe what I believe, how different are the other answers to the other big questions that we grapple with as humans going to be? And how differently are we going to live our lives? Because what we see from Gautama and the Buddha, and then the generations that came after him, is that there was a real emphasis of self-denial. Is the idea that I need to rid myself of desire. And desire is a huge tenet in Buddhism, the idea that desire is actually what causes suffering. So once again, just to kind of expound on this, we begin to see that the answer to the question of what is a human, what does it mean to be human, how you answer that is actually going to affect greatly your answers to the other basic questions, stuff like, what's the greatest problem that humans face? A Christian would probably say something to do with sin. A Buddhist would say desire. A Buddhist would say that we are holding so tightly to this life and the things that come with it that we are never going to reach the truest version of ourselves, which is actually to just simply be extinguished and to no longer exist.
Jeremy, how do Buddhists respond to a Christian who would say, well, you say desire, we say sin.
Yeah.
Their concept of sin, their response would be,
yeah. Well, Buddhists, in my experience, however, whatever that's worth, Buddhists are typically fairly agreeable with the concept of sin, but they would probably say that we sort of have it warped, which is the idea that like so you have three core tenets in Buddhism, which is desire, which leads to suffering. You have the ignorance of the true reality, but then you have impermanence. And what they would say is that what you call sin is really us failing to understand that life and reality is nothing but an ever-flowing river that is constantly changing, and that in your heart of hearts, you want it to stay the same. And so when we think of desire in the Western concept, we think of, I want material things, or I want something. What they would say is that desire, and what Christians likely would say is sin, what they might say is that really that is rooted in the desire that you have for things to stay the same, for you to have control, and that what you call sin is really your failure to let go and to cease trying to control everything, cease desiring permanence. And so, once again, it just kind of shows that at the bedrock of how we interpret reality is very different. I'll add one thing, not because it's an important group, but because it's very fascinating to me. And I think that these Eastern faiths are beginning to have more of a, you'll hardly meet a lot of Buddhists in the United States. But I think that a lot of these Eastern concepts are making their way into the framework of how a lot of Westerners, especially a lot of young people, there's a group that comes from South Asia called Jainism. Yeah. And it's not a very big group, but the reason why I always include it in conversations like this is that what they would say is that the true self is the Atman, it's the self, and that the physical needs to be purged. And so they actually, whereas Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama, he established what he called the middle way, which was you don't want to live too gluttonously, but you also don't want to live too harshly. There's legends that Gautama had fasted in such extreme ways that, he was near death. And he, through that, began to realize, like, no, living too gluttonously causes you to have too much desire in your life, but living too ascetically or too harshly actually causes desire too. So he established this middle way.
It's just control. It's just control. Yeah, exactly. Flipped on two different sides.
Certainly. That's what he would say. And that's actually where it's funny as a Christian is, I think, as far as the world religions goes, the one that's sort of there's a couple that I actually find Christians saying, well, I sort of agree with that. Like, the middle way is not a bad thing. But what Jainists say is that no, actually self-denial is the highest ideal. And they do it in different ways. Some Jain monks might they'll take a vow where they actually don't wear clothes and they only live off of the food that they beg from people, and they only eat as much food as can fit in the palm of their hands. But the reason I bring it up is that there's actually, within one particular sect of Jainism, monks who, and this is rare, I want to make sure I say it's rare, but it's a great teaching tool, that there's this idea called salakana. And what salakana is that there's actually monks within the Jain religion who at a certain point in their life will fast themselves to death. And the reason why I bring that up is that it shows quite clearly that there are people in this world that we're living in, that see the physical not just as something that needs to be conquered, but something that needs to be purged, and that the highest human ideal in becoming the true version of themselves is to completely deny themselves of all, not only physical comforts, but even physical necessities. And when we see that, we begin to see clearly, we open up our scriptures and we go, man, the world, or to interpret the world the way it seems like God wants us to, we have to come to a healthier view of the physical self, because there are people in this world who disagree inherently with us. And I think some of that, and we also see that too, actually, in the New Testament with the Gnostics, is that they really thought the physical, and this is a group of people that Christ and the apostles would have contended against spiritually, or at least like polemically, was that there's always been groups throughout all of human history that say the physical needs to be purged, right, and that the physical needs to be denied. And I think there's something peculiar that we follow a Lord who the Pharisees got mad at because his disciples were picking, food and eating on the Sabbath. And in we see in Christ a rejection of this harsh denial that we see in some of these other Eastern faiths. And once again, it comes down to this question of, okay, well, could it be that what it means to be human is to have a holistic understanding of that physical and spiritual? And I could go on and on. I would say there's very few, if any, faiths in the world that have the same view of human constitution as Christianity.
The thing that really fascinates me about this is I listen to you speak, like the way that my brain works is I go, Well, wait a minute. There are these vestiges of the biblical narrative and the story that are embedded into parts of this. So even what you just said, the idea of deny yourself, I instantly think about Matthew 16:24. Jesus says, "Deny yourself." But there's no period.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
in Greek grammar, there's no period in general, but in general, right? It's like deny yourself, and then the next sentence, carry a cross and follow me.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like what ends up happening is from a cosmic standpoint, as you know, I care a lot about kind of the cosmic realities and the unseen realm and kind of the battle that I feel like we're all in. And in part, these world religions, one of the deceptions in my view is to take vestiges of truth and to strip them out of its context and to present them as an isolated idea. And so as a summation of the brilliant, one of the things I love talking with people that just know their stuff is the flexibility to go into these different conversations and to start to piece these things together. So you're talking about these three kind of value propositions of, I think you were talking about was it Jain or Buddhist? Anyways, like you're just getting us into that. And the thing I think about is the biblical narrative of humanity. So you kept using the word purge. The purging, the purging, the purging. Well, and even with this idea of ceasing to exist, like that nirvana idea, it's a cessation of existence.
Right.
So purging and cessation of existence is fundamentally different than restoration of all things. Than renewal of our humanity.
Of perfection.
Of we'd call it progressive sanctification of being conformed to the image and into the likeness of Jesus. It's like, well, what does it mean to be truly human? It's like, well, Jesus is what it means to be truly human. Jesus is, we're made in the likeness and image of God. Jesus is the exact imprint of God himself. And so, on the one side, you have the purging, which is fascinating to me. Cause, and again, I'm just like trying to process in real time some of the stuff that I'm learning. It's like, part of what many world religions, at least these Eastern religions that we've talked about, we say that like, okay, to be truly human is in fact a, how would I say it? It's in fact a, not mockery, but it's a denial of humanity. Like it's a denial of human agency. It's a denial of the beauty of physicality.
It's a denial of the Imago Dei. Right? The idea that God saw fit to say, let us make man in our image. And inherently that, what we see in Christianity is that there is something, despite the fact that I find that there is a high level of despising of ourselves when we are out of the will of God. We despise something about ourselves. And if we aren't careful, we will stop despising sin and despising ourselves. And what that leads us to is down these paths where you might not ever call yourself a Jain or a Buddhist or whatever, but you're making the same mistake, which is to say, there is nothing about me that should be cherished. There is nothing about me in which the operative feeling that God has about me is love and value, because before he created, he said, let us make something about man like us. And then he created us spiritual and physical. And then and so I think that and that's why I started like even just that diatribe by saying, when I see these things, I walk away encouraged to see in Scripture that God does want me. There are some things about me that he wants me to purge. But it's not me. He doesn't want me to purge me. He doesn't want me to purge myself. He doesn't want me to cease to exist. He wants me to become more and more and more, you said progressive sanctification, like he designed me to be. And then one day, he'll do that himself. And that's where, we talk about that recreation. The other side of this, and I think it's worth mentioning too, is that it's the complete antithetical viewpoints in the world of religions. I think most familiar with people would be what the Latter-day Saints believe about like what makes us us. So the quick cliff notes would be that humans are pre-existent spiritual beings. They've never, really, the spiritual part of them has never not existed, and that God created this creation out of pre-existent primordial matter. Out of chaos, he fashioned order. And that at the height of all of this is that we serve a God who at one point in time was a human just like us. And he actually, now Latter-day Saints would say that God, or Heavenly Father, as they would call him, is a man with flesh and bone. And he is an exalted human being. And that a Latter-day Saint believes that if they live a life of following after the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they might one day be gods themselves.
Exactly.
And so we see the two polar opposites, actually, of the answer of what does it mean to be human. You have these, if a Jane and a Latter-day Saint were in the room, it'd be almost impossible for them to have a conversation. And that's why I think understanding worldview is very important, because it helps you understand why do we live in a world where this person's speaking really loudly and this person's speaking really loudly, but they're not speaking the same language at all.
This is really important. And just for everybody to catch this would be so fundamentally important that we're talking about two different operating systems. Yeah. This would be like me taking my Apple Watch and trying to sync it with a Samsung Galaxy tablet. Yes. Right? It's like error. Yeah. It's not going to work. We're operating on two different operating systems. And what's fascinating is the Eastern religions that we've talked about thus far is this almost obsessive desire to purge the human physicality. But then when we talk about Mormon or Latter-day Saints, however you want to, whatever language they like to be called today, which they like to be called Christian too, which is crazy, which is wild, because that's not okay. Right. So it's actually an over-exaltation of humanity.
Exactly.
C.S. Lewis has this excellent quote in Screw Tape Letters, like what the enemy like is happy either with an obsessive compulsive view of the spiritual or a total neglect of the spiritual. And I just think that layers so well in so many other conversations, and we find this exact same thing that's happening here. And so the reason why I wanted to pause to just point this out is why I'm passionate about the work that you do, why I want to continue in the areas that the Lord is leading me into in terms of spiritual warfare, cosmic realm, unseen battle, divine Deuteronomy 32 worldview stuff, is because we have to become aware of people's operating systems. Yeah. Because if we want to be winsome for the gospel, it would be irresponsible for me to walk into a basketball game and begin to convince people that Messi is the greatest basketball player of all time. Right. Yeah. Like, what? Yeah. Yeah, you're so out there. We are not even entertaining conversation with you, And unfortunately, I think often Christians are those people. Christians are at times, and this is an overgeneralization. I don't mean to overgeneralize, but at times it feels like we are so ill-equipped in the operating systems of other folks that if we don't fundamentally get what does the text, what does God say of what it means to be human, how are we going to even ever interact with our neighbors and with the people that we're around that are fundamentally running on a different operating system of what humanity is? Hey, Humble Theology fam, I'm so excited to share with you my first solo Bible study, Finding Peace Through Humility, a Bible study through the book of Judges. Now, the whole idea of the book of Judges is that the people of God are spiraling kind of out of control. And the question we have is it possible for them to actually come out of the spiral? And it is. And kind of what I present throughout this Bible study is that the thing that's hiding in plain sight, that God is just consistently trying to draw the people of Israel back then and his people today to, is the ancient virtue of humility. The gift of humility is the gift of self-awareness, so that we can know who God is, we can know who we are, and so that we are powerfully equipped to know other people. And so I'm really excited about this Bible study. There are video lessons that go with it, and of course, this Bible study guide as well. You can get Finding Peace Through Humility on Amazon, wherever Bible studies are sold. And then I'll also put a link for it as well in the show notes. Blessings to you, friends.
Yeah, and I think what I would encourage listeners to is that it's not like, when I sort of list out haphazardly like what these other views are, is it's not that I feel like we should get all these other religions at a table and say our thoughts are better, or my way of understanding the world is better than yours, or it makes more sense. I do think it is better. I do think it makes more sense. But what I would say to listeners is, by the grace of God, we, in different ways, different paths, every single believer, follower of Christ has come to God's kingdom in a different way. But at the beginning of it, it was like the man who stumbled on a treasure in a field. And what we have stumbled upon in this world where Paul at the Areopagus says, we live in a world where man somewhat admirably is groping for God. Yeah. They're just reaching out for him. That's what I see when I see this other face. I don't really see very rarely, I should say, see anything or anybody that just really infuriates me. Sometimes I do, but more so, I feel probably a shadow of what Paul felt in Acts 17 when he was looking out over Athens and he was brokenhearted. And what I would encourage a listener to understand is like, hey, I don't want you to go just start beating people over the head that like, hey, you're stupid and the way that you understand reality is stupid and I'm smart. But instead say, hey, I stumbled on this truth that came from God, and he, in his goodness and kindness and grace and mercy, has put the answers to the questions we are all asking. What does it mean to be human? What is humanity's greatest problem? Where do we all come from? Where are we all going? What does it look like to live a successful life? He has answered those questions in a way that we can understand. And if you would like to, I would just love to go through these questions with you and just show you what I believe the scriptures say, because it's not about what I think. It's not like when I look at Buddhism, like I said, I look at the middle way and I go, yeah, I think he's pretty much right. It's like, yeah, like you don't want to be too gluttonous. You don't want to be too harsh. Like that. If I stop there, I go, oh, the Buddha was probably right. But what I look and I go, but what's missing from that is the image of God. What's missing from that is that God's heart for us is love. And that is not found in Buddhism. And so I think right now in this Western coexisty type postmodernism that we all live in, that we usually find people in one of two camps. Either they're throwing stones at each other, or they're all just saying, can't we all just get along? We're probably all more right than we are wrong. Let's just look past our differences. And it's like, no, listen, how someone answers this question and all these other questions massively changes how they view the truth of life and existence and reality. But God has given us not only a better way, but his way and his design. And the good life, there's a theologian, I think from Yale, Miroslav Volf. Yeah. He talks about the good life. I would encourage listeners. It's a heavy read, but go listen to him talk about the good life. Yeah. And what he says is like, no, the good life is following the teachings of Christ. And man, if we live that good life and we live out the answers to this question, what does it mean to be human? I think what might happen is some people who might disagree with us might say, man, the fact that and Christians are not just looking for balance, the idea of like, you and I have bounced back and forth saying, hey, it's physical and spiritual. We're not just striving for balance. It's that our viewpoint seems more balanced because our viewpoint is true. Mm-hmm. And we aren't just picking polar opposites, because polar opposites are always easier than the true balanced position. It's so much easier to live a harsh life where I just deny myself everything. And it's very easy to live a very hedonistic, gluttonous life. What's not easy is to follow after Christ and to deny myself and pick up my cross, but then also to rest. The Sabbath in and of itself is a denial of a harsh asceticism that's purging the truest version of you away. God commanded that we, every once in a while, we just stop and rest. Yeah. And I think inherently from that, we see like something peculiar at work,
Yeah.
and something truer at work that just refuses to bow down to these polar, diametrically opposed viewpoints of over exaltation, but also the other side, which is despisal, a despising of the self.
Yeah.
Neither one of those fits within Christianity.
Yeah, I love that. And this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you. And this is the tip of the spear, as they would say, of these conversations. And I want to just highlight some might be like, well, I'm not in relationship with Buddhists or with Hindus or, with whatever. And to that, and you've already identified it, I would just strongly urge you to recognize, however, that the Eastern philosophical religious systems, while they might not be taking over in terms of like the spread of that religion, the ideologies are 100,000% making their way into our everyday lives. The proliferation of crystals, of mantras, of there's these things that have become extremely popularized that have their roots in these philosophical systems, and these philosophical systems are being like run on this operating system. What does it mean to be human? And so once again, I think it's an important thing. Now, I'm not saying this just, Jeremy, for no reason, but this is very true. I often get questions on where can I learn about world religions? Who should I, and people ask me questions about Hinduism and stuff. I'd be like, listen, I know I'm Indian. I should be very well versed in all this, but the guy you need to talk to is Jeremy Jenkins. And so I am just very grateful for your scholarship. Would you do me a favor and just point people to, I know you've got some book projects that you're working on. You've already released some stuff with our mutual friend, Felicia Masonheimer, and everyone with Theologian, but then also just your ministry specifically, because I want to highlight that we should invest in the work that you're doing, because it's making us all better students of God's word, and then just equipped for these conversations.
Well, I always appreciate you, Joel, and you, like Felicia, have been very kind to me and a lot of other people that we kind of are in our circles that we run in. And I always appreciate how you leverage the platform that God has given you, and how you've continued to just, press on towards keeping conversations like this at the forefront. There's two books that I've put out through Verity Press, which you mentioned is Felicia Masonheimer's publishing wing. One on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and one on neo-paganism and Wicca, which came out a few weeks ago. They're both very short. I think, I can't remember, maybe like 30,000 words. They fit in your pocket, which was the design. And we call it the Explore and Engage series, because we think that to engage with these people, we want to understand them from their perspective as much as we can without giving too much credence to those worldviews. But then we want to engage through a model of contextualization, which really just means doing what Paul did at the Areopagus, which is putting the gospel in terms that these people can understand. So we have those two books available. We do have resources on our website, allthingsallpeople.org. We call it a database, but it's really just sort of like a brief primer on many of the most prevalent faiths and some of the ones that I'm interested. The biggest thing that we do right now, which is really what I'm most passionate about, is what we call the Engage Network, which is where churches can partner with All Things All People and receive really just, I say coaching, but really just like a partnership, a friendship almost, in setting up missional communities in their churches to engage the least reached peoples in their cities and regions. I live and exist with a conviction that over the last 100 years of Western Christianity, we have sent all of our best evangelists overseas, which is phenomenal. But we have lived and operated with an assumption that everyone here is reached. And every single day that becomes less true. And, you've been to my church. Like, I live in small town, Western North Carolina, about an hour outside of Charlotte. And like, I could take you on a day trip around my, podunk little small town and introduce you to people who not only are not believers, but they come from parts of the world, or they believe some of these other religions and faiths.
Yeah.
And so we've been partnering most notably with New Spring Church, which is big church in South Carolina, and they've been really, really good to us to let us develop a strong partnership with them. So if there's any church leaders, pastors, what have you, listening, who listens to this conversation and says, I want to be able to have conversations based around the idea of worldview and these operating systems. I like the way you said that. That's where the Engage Network can really help. And so people, but also at the end of the day, like, I know you're the same way as me. You get probably a lot more DMs than I do, but like, I just tell people, just if you ever have a question, just shoot me an email, like shoot me a DM on Instagram. I can't get to all of them. Some of them are like, it's like, that's more like a 40-page paper of an answer. But my heart is really just, cause I'm also first and foremost a pastor. And, and my heart for this is like, I think people don't understand, what they don't understand. And I've been blessed, that God has given me grace to enter into these places and these studies and to just, I don't know, be protected. I don't want other people really to do some of the things that I have been privileged to do, but I want to leverage everything that I've done and studied in the books that I've read and things like that to help equip Christians to never feel insecure about having conversations with people about the gospel, even if that person is coming from a faith system, a religion that is hugely counter to the good news of Christ. So people can reach out to me for pretty much anything they need, and I'll do whatever I can to help them. As I said already, I'm very appreciative of you and your friendship and leading the way in a lot of these conversations. I think it's more important than you even realize.
Well, I appreciate it, man. And I know we will see each other soon in New York. So yes. I am very, very excited about that. Appreciate you, Jeremy. Yes, we'll talk soon.